welcome. My name is Vince Padua. I'm the Axway Chief Technology and Innovation Officer. And here for 5 minutes, we're here to talk about cybersecurity and APIs and why it's good enough for government work. So why good enough for government work? Why the name and title of this particular session? Well, good enough for government work comes from World War II. It was typically used back then to cite high degrees of quality and performance. Today, we use it sarcastically or as a joke to actually show low quality or low value in the work being performed. So we use it sarcastically, but I want to sort of use that and turn it back on its head because we'll highlight some of the most recent expectations that the U.S. government is citing for your cybersecurity posture. So first, 72% of enterprises last year had between 1 and 10 security breaches or security incidents. And every enterprise does not stand alone. Every enterprise has 40 or more partners. They operate in many different countries, in different industries, and different ways of monetizing the goods and services that they provide. Yet, in the same security survey, 88% of those surveyed found that, or cited that, their largest security concerns or risks is largely their supply chain. So essentially who they're partnering with, the quality of their security, the quality of their talent, and the reliability of their goods and services. So not so much any one particular piece of technology, it's more of who are they partnering with, how secure are they as the largest threat to their security strategy and their security posture. And so to the concept of good enough for government work, a few weeks ago, the US government released a memo that outlined 19 separate tasks that every government body in the United States needed to have a plan for within the next 60 days to move towards a zero trust architecture. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about what zero trust means, but one aspect or one driver of the move towards a zero trust architecture for the US government was the idea that the perimeter of the US government, both its individual agencies and how they're interconnected, was no longer sufficient. So things like VPNs, things like firewalls, things like API gateways, et cetera, were no longer sufficient at the perimeter to be able to accurately or adequately defend and secure the data, the services, the human capital, the human resources, et cetera, from external and or internal attacks. And so as I said on the previous slide, there were 19 tasks. I'm going to highlight 3 of them as it relates to APIs and cybersecurity. So here are the 3. The first is go API first. I know that seems a little bit straightforward or a little bit basic, but in our conversations with customers, you would be surprised how many are still just beginning this journey to moving towards API first. And on the left-hand side, this is the specific task that the US government outlined, which is to move towards immutable workloads. So immutable in the idea that they're easily versioned and upgraded, and that the performance and the usage posture doesn't really change. And the so what, or why is this a good thing, or maybe what are we trying to move away from? Well, one is to move away from mutable infrastructure, which if not versioned well or done correctly, increases risk in the threat surface area, as well as can create unplanned usage and failure states, which can open the implementation details of this stack to attackers to try to exploit. In moving to API first or an API facade, it facilitates more of the immutable infrastructure that we're trying to get to, so that the facade stays mostly the same. So how you interact with the application stays mostly the same, even though the applications themselves may be changing and evolving as is necessary. The second, which is a classic zero trust architecture tenet, is to deny by default. So here, the US government states that on the left-hand side, that agencies must employ centralized identity management systems across the whole of their ecosystem. And so what? Well, broken access controls overall in 2021 was the number one risk and or most used implementation for breaching enterprise systems by OWASP in 2021. Most organizations are not set up to behave as though it is in least privilege. And that sets up, obviously, a wider attack surface area. So we recommend API rate limiting and denial of service. Again, relatively straightforward. But again, you would be surprised at how many enterprises are not doing it. And secondly, to use domain models to enable unique departmental and or functional limit requirements. The third that we'll highlight, and the last that we'll highlight, is the cataloging of all assets. Now, in many enterprises that we come across, this is incredibly difficult, if not challenging. The US government is saying that they need to go this way to enable dynamic discovery and full cataloging, full visibility, and full telemetry of the whole of the infrastructure. And on the right-hand side, when we see enterprises, businesses today, right, most have a lot of 3 or more different API gateways. Many have unprotected APIs and undocumented endpoints. And again, anything that is publicly facing, you have to assume attackers know about it in a matter of seconds to minutes, and we'll be figuring out ways to try to ultimately exploit it. So the recommendation, right, is to move to a centralized control plane that supports multi-factor authentication and consent management relative to your services, applications, and workflows, and ensure that all APIs and pathways are hardened against account enumeration attacks. And so there it is, 3 of the 19, in it being good enough for government work. One thing is, if you go and you read that report, I think what you'll find is that what the US government has recommended is significantly ahead of where most enterprises are. And so it's an interesting list of tasks. It's an interesting strategy to take a look at. We've highlighted 3 relative to APIs and cybersecurity, and I hope that they were helpful. Thanks again.